Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Welcome back to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. I'm Adam Piercy, here with my co-host Mick Mulroy. So, Mick, we were going to jump right into a topic today, which I actually pushed this forward, which was the topic of, it's one of the core virtues, temperance. And it's interesting because I think you and I both have seen there are different definitions of this. So why don't you open up for us today with your interpretation of temperance as a virtue, or how you would describe it?
Yeah, so I think to start with, temperance usually gets kind of short shrift, right? You always talk about courage and wisdom and
Yeah.
justice, right, which are kind of more monumental. Although temperance, for a lot of people, is kind of the core of Stoicism, sometimes for the right reasons, maybe sometimes for the wrong reasons, but it certainly does attract a lot of people to it. And I'll get to why I said the wrong reasons in a second. But ultimately, it has evolved over time. Because if you look at Zeno being a cynic, where he started, at least in that philosophy
Yeah.
and then left, they were all about denying themselves of pleasures, right? And I think, obviously Zeno, I don't know exactly why Zeno left, but um, my speculation has always been that he realized that you still have to, function in society and kind of
Yeah.
yourself, right? A lot of these cynics walked around getting handouts and then bragging about the fact that, they didn't value money, but
Right.
somebody was taking care of them, right? So that's a whole other episode. But I think the original concept of temperance was really focused on
Right.
like worldly pleasures, right? Like, don't drink too much, don't become obsessed with sex and stuff.
Yeah.
Don't be gluttonous. It's kind of deadly sins, right?
Yeah.
Um, there was a time in human evolution where people could pretty much eat a lot and drink a lot, and obviously sex
Yeah.
was there, probably pretty prevalent in the ancient Mediterranean.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is that, and I'd come back to that because I think it is important and is what a lot of people have to deal with today, and it's only getting worse in the sense that it's just easier.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't have to be wealthy to drink 4 bottles of wine a day, right? You can buy
Yeah.
bad wine. That's what I'm saying, right? Especially go to Costco, right? You
Yeah.
could, unfortunately, like, porn is ubiquitous online, man. You can't buy a pair of shoes without getting an advertisement for, something that leads you down a road, apparently, to not apparently, but so it's
Yeah.
even more, especially for young men. So I think we should come back to these aspects of it, and then
Yeah.
the biggest issue we have with poor people, at least in the United States now, is obesity. Think about that.
Yeah.
Obesity, right? So, and it's mostly because of bad food, but it's also, eating too much of bad food. So I
Yeah.
think there's definitely an element of that importance in modern society, even more so than potentially ancient Greece. And I think people should take umbrage in that. Um, Everything in moderation. That's what Aristotle said. But you can look at literally every Stoic significant philosopher, and they all talk about, basically take what you need and that's it.
Yeah.
It's a core element of it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's what draws a lot of people to it. So that's the first thing we could get into if you like, and then obviously your thoughts. The other two factors I wanted to bring in is what I would call anger management. Um,
Yeah.
and one of the biggest benefits by the way, I was doing research on temperance today, and it's interesting. There are a lot of priests out there that, Catholic priests especially, that use Stoicism. Probably,
Mm-hmm.
they always have Catholicism and Stoicism, going back to St. Augustine and
Of course.
Thomas Aquinas. It's very tied, right? But I think,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, I'll ask my priest friend, but I think they're using it because they know how young men are attracted to Stoicism now. You know what I mean? So
Oh yeah.
like, there's a
I
lot
see
of
what you
priests I've
mean.
studied,
It's a good word.
and of course they go from like Epictetus to Marcus
Yeah.
Aurelius to then take St. Thomas Aquinas, and they get you
Yeah.
back to Catholicism.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing I was going to bring up is the Stoic pause, which I think is important today, especially with when somebody pisses you off. Essentially,
Yeah.
take the time not to respond. Take the time to walk away, take a walk, whatever. Don't be like your enemy, or not your enemy, but your in this case your antagonist, like Marcus Aurelius.
Yes.
Paraphrase or Marcus Aurelius. And then the last one I wanted it, and Idos is the is a modesty in ancient Greece, and I think there's an
Right.
element of temperance that includes modesty, which is also humility and not being braggadocious and not
Yeah.
trying to highlight yourself above others and stuff. I think
Mhm.
that's also part of temperance. And then the last one, which is why I say sometimes people take it the wrong way, is lecture 6 from Musonius Rufus, which
Mhm.
talks specifically about putting yourself through hardship, physically, mentally, to
Yeah.
prepare. I totally believe in it. I mean, obviously, it's a military aspect, especially in combat arms, special operations, and infantry. But I think some people just focus on that. Like that's the
Yeah.
entire
Yeah, yeah.
stoicism is I'm gonna, run an ultra marathon and jump in an ice bath. I think it's part
Right.
of it, actually, at least from Rufus's perspective, and I think it's a good thing. Not to take it to extremes, but
Right.
I think it's part of it. But oftentimes, you look at the influencers and they take stoicism and they just try to market, you know, that kind of aspect. So I
Yeah,
think all
definitely.
of those are part of temperance. And if you want, we can go. Well, first hear your comments on all the above, and then we can go into detail.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting that I see parallel today, excuse me, what I find parallel today with the ancient Rome where temperance was really pushed. I think it feels like that was very heavily pushed from a Stoic perspective there in a way. Marcus talks about it, right? Where he's trying to, and temperance it has a root word that I think is important in my mind, at least when you look at it. To temper something, right, is to harden it through. If you do it with metal, you do it with heat, right? And glass, there's tempered glass and things like that, but also there's temperament, right, which it relates to this as well, which I think is, what your demeanor is like, right, who you are, what your actions, what you look like, right, in those circumstances. But going back to your first part, I mean, I find a parallel today with what happened in ancient Rome, right? Like, and so I've been reading this book on Cato. I've struggled reading for the last couple of months, so I'm still working through this book on Cato, the I think it's Rome's Last Citizen is what it's called, right? And what's really interesting is that Cato, in a way, is facing off against people who have an inordinate amount of power in that world. Pompey, Crassus,
Mhm.
Julius Caesar, right? Although Caesar's funny because you find out that he actually had a lot of debt. He just like moved it around, but ultimately Pompey and Crassus were essentially like an early version of the millionaire billionaire you see today, right? Where they have so much wealth and they own so much land and they own so many things, right? They have a private navy, they have a private army, they've got all that. And I think that opulence, right? I think there's a reason why that comes up a lot with this because what you were saying where you lack self-control, so you just, eat and eat and eat or you whatever, right? I think it parallels with today, right? Like at some point you have to ask yourself, like, what do I need versus what do I want? Right. And I think that's a big part of it for me when I look at this. So I agree with you on the first part for sure. Not that I really disagree with you strongly on anything that you said, but ultimately, I think the first part, there's this funny parallel today, right? And you're finding out about, some of the rich and famous, right, who are, they're not, I won't go into any specifics, but like they may not show the best moral character, right? When you actually find out what's happening in the background. And, I think a Stoic would look at that, for example, and say, well, this overabundance, this opulence, right? Um, is probably affecting them deeply, much more deeply than they would probably realize. So that's what I would say to be the first part. But the second part, the temperament part, where you were talking about modesty, humility, I think that's a really important part of a lot of this as well, right? Understanding that no matter what, no man is the center of the universe. I mean, Marcus is a rare person who exists within the sort of commentary of today through this book that he wrote, not for anybody else. And in some ways, it's kind of luck, right? Because it almost didn't survive. I mean, we know
Yeah.
that. And we know there are fragments, right? What's that?
You said burn it, right? They just didn't.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
stopped.
Yeah. And I think, that's an important thing. We always have to remember that we are one person of many. We are, there's a humility or a modesty that I think the Stoics always kind of talk about. Temperance is an interesting one though too, because you're right. I find some people they get very defensive about it because they sort of say, well, I should be able to do or say or make a choice whatever I want it to be, right? And I would say I don't think you or I would ever say to someone, don't choose, like, that's not true. The question is are you making that choice for a good reason, right? Is it like eating for sustenance, right, versus eating because you have a deep craving for pork rinds and chocolate covered pretzels? I mean, it's a
Oh,
thing that you
your thing.
no, that's not my thing. Actually, I don't like chocolate covered pretzels that much, but I just meant like, so I could. It was the first thing I thought of for opulence. I don't like. I've never had a pork rind. I don't even know how to get them in Canada. But anyways, but the thing for me is,
I definitely had them in the South.
you've had, yeah. But the thing is, too, no one would say don't even have one, right? Like there's a self control aspect going back to that, where you have the ability to say no, right? You have the ability to have that to temper yourself, right, and say no. And then the last thing about, pushing yourself to experience a hardship, I mean, that's a big part of this. Now, I actually am not a big fan of the idea of like that equates to do an Ironman immediately or something like that, right? Because there's so many people who struggle with that. It's more, I think, in the day to day, right? So, because of my sport, right? I'm a classic cross country skier racer here in Ontario, the province where I live. I have to do ice baths sometimes. It's a therapeutic thing for my legs because I seem to have really tight calves all the time, and I get calf injuries. And so I do it for that purpose, but I also know that it's a tough thing, especially it's cold outside, especially on a long ski day. Like I've skied on minus 25 Celsius. It's really dangerous to do that though. So I don't suggest that for anybody. But you come inside, it's nice and warm, and then I've got to go back into an ice bath. Not a great feeling, not a great look. You're sort
But
of,
it is good
you're
for
shriveled up. Let's
you. It
say
is.
again.
Good. I mean, ice baths are good for you. I mean,
They are good for you. But what I'm saying is they have like a therapeutic effect. But I think as well, there's a hardship to that of like, I go through that, but I don't like, I'm not the one who's sitting there swearing. I'm not the one who's like, angry that I have to do that. There's a spa here in the Ontario area that I live in that has it's a Finnish spa, so it has cold plunges and everything. And you see people jump in the cold plunge and they get like mad. They get mad that they're in a cold plunge. And it's like, well, you jumped in, and I always think it's funny.
I saw that the other day. There's a lot of hot springs in Montana,
Oh
and
yeah,
so they have to do the comparison. They also have cold plunges,
yeah,
right? Which is good. It's therapeutic, right? It's natural hot spring, and then
oh yeah.
you have that in. Yeah, I mean, you do see people get angry,
I know it's weird,
like
right?
psyching themselves up, and like I hate this.
I know.
It's okay. Well,
Yeah, there was this guy. He was like slapping himself all over his
yeah,
body, and I'm
yeah,
like, I'm you go ahead. I'll catch up. Like I didn't know this person. I just thought it was funny because at some point you're like, okay, that seems a little bit excessive. But
yeah.
also, if you can't
People like
endure
to
any
watch
hardship,
themselves.
even not that that's really a hardship, but like if you can't endure anything that throws you like that, you have to ask yourself that. So, yeah, I want to kind of pause there because it would be easy to talk about one more. Well, maybe I could talk about one more thing. You talked about the Stoic pause. There's an interesting concept in Zen Buddhism, which is called the three nen, which is where when something happens to you, you have three events that occur in your mind. The first event is the split second reaction. So when you, let's say something like you touch a hot iron, excuse me, you touch a hot iron, excuse me, you touch a hot iron, and then Your first instinct is pain and you recoil. That's the first nen. The second nen is usually the reaction your brain has with some sort of cognitive reasoning behind it. So that's where you'll like go, oh, bleepity bleep, right? Or if someone cuts you off in traffic, right? You might swear at that person in your car. And then the third nen is when your rational, very rational brain takes back over and goes, why did I lose my cool like that? And it's interesting to me, these parallels you see across the different philosophies, because I honestly think it's a sort of those layers of truth that you have in sort of all humans, right? That our brains kind of work like that. You always have a split second reaction, and then you have a choice. You have your first chosen reaction, and then you have your final reaction, which is your rational, like calm reaction when you finally realize what you really feel about that situation. And if after you do something like that, you ask yourself, why did I swear like that? That's the third nen. That's the one where you're kind of balancing yourself out. But I think, what I wanted to pass over to is, I think the thing is though, is it is more challenging than people think. I mean, we call it a virtue for us, and as much as it is a virtue, I think it's one of the harder ones to do, right? Because courage and wisdom are things you can sort of seek out or act out. But
Mhm.
justice, and temperance, which I believed in my mind are connected, they're really hard for people, I think, a lot of the time. And I keep trying to figure out why that is.
So, yeah, good point. I mean, if you were to look at what the perfect, although I don't think Stoics would want to pick out a perfect, but an ideal um, Stoic when it comes to temperance, it would be the person who would turn the other cheek, right? To use a Christian saying. Like Cato literally got punched in the back, and
Hmm.
when the person came up to apologize, him acted like it didn't happen. So beyond
Yeah.
just a stoic pause and not responding, he just said, "Yeah, I don't even remember it." Right? So these are lessons you can take and use in modern life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they would also not be shrinking violets. In fact, they'd be tough as woodpecker lips, as my friend used to say, right? Because they test themselves physically. Whether it's endurance sports or combative sports. I mean, that's very popular. Always has
Yeah.
been. Always has
Yeah.
been. This was it. Chrysippus was the boxer right after
Yes.
Zeno. One was a boxer, one was a runner, right? Um, Marcus Aurelius was a boxer, a wrestler, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Big
combative
cartoon.
sports should be done in the ring, right? That's what I used to tell my boxers, right? Don't run around picking fights at bars. But you would
Yeah.
be the person that most ignores getting punched in the back while you're trying to give a speech. But if you got the guy in the ring, you'd win. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
how I've always viewed it as growing up. Um, and you're capable of enduring things that other people aren't because you test yourself all the time. That's
Yeah.
lecture six
Yeah.
by Musonius Rufus. And then
Hmm.
the person would also be, I think, somebody who was humble, who didn't seek the spotlight, who didn't buy ostentatious thing to show off their wealth. Not that there's anything wrong with having wealth, but there's
Right.
no reason to flaunt it as some kind of peacock.
Hmm.
That person would probably live in a modest house, drive a modest car if he drove one at all, or she, and would deliberately not try to talk themselves up. And so,
Right.
I mean, if you're looking for somebody, the Stoic view of this, I think those things would fit it. And obviously, didn't overeat, didn't drink too much. And on the last few, I would just like to add, since this is supposed to be practical life events,
Yeah.
what I've heard that I think have worked, and I'm older than you. I've had people tell me, "Look, you got to cheat," and what they meant by cheating is you got to set things up to your advantage. So people who have a problem like drinking one beer and they can't stop drinking beer, I've had friends tell me, so they go to bed early.
Right.
And people are like, so what? What does that mean? Well, if you go to bed at 9, chances are you're not going to
Yeah.
drink a lot of beer, right? You're
Yeah.
just cheating. You get up way early and you go to bed early, and better things happen. Or you overeat at night, or whatever it is that you do at
Yeah.
night. It's not. Good. I had another guy that swore by this, did it for, as far as I know, still does it. Every beer, I'm just using beer as an example, not that beer's bad. Every beer he drank, he ran 3 miles.
Wow.
If he didn't add it up at the end of the week, then he would start running. Right. So, and you think about it, I mean, that's, you have 2 beers and you got to run 6 miles a day, right?
Yeah.
So, which is the average man, right? You can
Right.
do that. You can
So
be
if you
fine.
drink Guinness, is it like 4.5? So
Guinness is actually healthier than most beers that you
I
drink.
know. Maybe it's 2.5
It doesn't
instead.
have that much carbs. Look it up,
Yeah, I
and
know.
it's
And
like a
for the
full
cancer
filled meal
patients, right? So
with minerals and vitamins.
I know.
I'm not
Minerals and
just saying that
vitamins.
'cause I'm Irish. No,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'm with you though. I'm with you though about this. I mean, taking the action is a really important thing, right? Like a lot of people think that stoicism exists in this vacuum where like you take the punch and you just don't react. I mean, you did talk about the Cato story. It's not but it's not that you do nothing, right? There's still an action that you can take. I think a key thing about temperance and self control and all of that is an honest look at the root cause of some of these things, right? Like if you're in an environment where drinking is celebrated, for example, and you're struggling with controlling it, then extracting yourself from that environment, that may be the right choice for
yeah,
you,
that's what I
right?
mean by cheating. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
cheating.
exactly.
Just
No,
don't.
exactly, and that's why I'm agreeing with you on that, and I think that's really important. So the key thing is to ask yourself, like, what is the root cause here? Right? Is it you have too much idle time on your hands? Right? Running, walking, reading, like doing something else. I mean, I think food's an interesting one for me. We were talking about this a little bit when we were texting earlier this week to get ready for the episode. Some of the studies coming out this week about some of these um, pharmaceutical aids you can take for like weight loss and everything. It turns out that they have lots of side effects that people aren't really understanding until now. Things that can inhibit your appetite or whatnot. They also affect things in your body like dopamine and stuff like that, which you do want because dopamine makes you feel good about stuff. So the thing is though is like trying to do those things sometimes is a shortcut, and I'm not saying it sounds funny because it sounds like I'm contradicting your cheating thing, but it's more like there's a shortcut that just addresses the symptom, but there's the cheating that you're describing where you're addressing a root cause, right? I had to 10 years ago, I had to cut some people out of my life that were toxic in a literal way because the drinking culture with them and the culture of like over partying and stuff like that, I guess I would say, it no longer aligned with what was going well for me. And I was sitting there going, I don't think I can do this anymore. Right. And so, I would say that all the time. I would say all the time, it's just like, look, I don't do this anymore. I remember somebody one time, they said to me, like, they came up to me and they said really loudly in my face, they were like, smile, Adam. What's wrong now? And I was like, there's nothing wrong. I'm just not drinking. So I don't know. I'm just myself. Like, I'm just kind of standing here. Right. And I'll tell there's a Zen story that they talk about to explain this where there's a town somewhere and parked in the one of the streets of the town is this horse that everyone knows is really mean, and it like kicks everybody and it's just horrible. It's just like a bronco ready to go anytime. And the townspeople are like, how are we going to get by this? And they look over and they see that the Zen master who lives down the road, he's just coming out of his house. And they say, oh, he's going to know what to do. We'll watch him. So they stand there watching, and he gets out of his house and he starts walking, and he looks up and he sees the horse and he goes, oh no. And then he turns and he goes through the alley and he walks down the other street. So you know what I mean? He like extricates himself from that circumstance
Yeah,
because everyone thinks there's this like fancy thing you can do. Sometimes it's the simple thing of not going out to that thing, not buying the junk food at the grocery store, right? Just don't have it in the house or something like that. Is it easy? No. But sometimes it's a lot easier than people think, right?
yeah, yeah. And it's cheating is. I'm just kind of using that
Yeah,
jokingly,
yeah.
but going to bed early and getting up early isn't really cheating. It's just being
Yeah.
healthy, right? So, and like you said, if you have a hard time controlling, how much you drink when you go to bars, go to breakfast with your friends instead,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you have a hard time drinking too much at breakfast, then maybe we got to seek some other assistance. But you see what
Yeah.
I mean? It's not cheating. It's just changing your lifestyle to the point where you don't have to constantly struggle with your own demons, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that that I think is kind of the core of what it's multiple different facets, right? You have from the Stoic pause to the
Yeah.
idos, the idea of humility,
Yeah.
which I think is incredibly important.
Sure.
And that's another thing you brought up, obviously meditations, and very ironically, if you read that, one of the things he really harps on is his fame is so fleeting. Like
Yes.
he says it often in his writings that basically, like, even him, who he knew he was a Roman emperor, right? So like
Yeah.
he knew he was going to be remembered, but even him is like, there's a lot of Roman emperors, whatever. And he become the
Yeah.
most famous, like the one that everybody keeps talking about in perpetuity, probably
Mhm.
because he was so humble, right?
Yeah.
For a Roman emperor who could have done all these things nonstop, right? He could have those giant barrels of wine. He could have had harems of lady folks. He could have had all that stuff, and he just didn't. He was out there along with his men, fighting on the front line, sleeping on a straw mat, enduring the same hardships, eating the same food. I
Yeah.
mean, that's why he became kind of the model of what a military leader should be. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think it's an incredible important part of Stoicism.
Yeah.
I see. I think people give it short drift because it's not as lofty and an idealistic. I think is
Yeah.
being that soldier that saves his colleagues on the battlefield, or
Yeah.
that person who marches for civil rights. Uh,
Mhm.
like down in Selma, where the police
Mhm.
attacked them, right, for justice or wisdom.
Yeah.
Those are all very lofty and very important parts. Temperance is more of a how do you live day to day, at least how I view it.
Yeah.
So it is just as important because you're not going to have that many chances to storm the beach, or maybe march across the bridge with Martin Luther King. But you're going to have every day. You're going to have a challenge potentially for how you live your life, especially with the anger part, right?
Yeah.
Because nowadays, and I think there's a bigger issue, in the mortal worlds of Mike Tyson, people would be a lot nicer if you could punch them in the mouth. I mean, you can't really punch people in the mouth anymore.
Yeah.
So people are really bold and, quite frankly, jerks.
Yeah.
Because they go with the idea like, I can say whatever I want to this person because
Yeah.
he's not gonna jack me up because he's gonna go to jail, which is true, and you shouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm not
No, no,
advocating.
but on the other side, I think there's a situation there where you kind of go, like, there's a lot of people who are like offended in a very loud way,
Mhm.
where it's kind of like, okay, well, like, especially if people like I've seen people be offended by objective fact, right? And because I work in engineering, right? And you just kind of sit there and you go, look, like, you have to calm down, right? Because it's not helping anybody. We're not getting anywhere, right? And talking about there's only so many times to storm the beach. I mean, I would say temperance is, you're right, that everyday thing that it builds that foundation that when you do storm the beach, when the things are when the bombs are going off, when
Good point.
when the people are looking to you for guidance or leadership, right? The temperance activities you do leading up to that, I think, set you up for a much better chance of success, right? And I think that's a really important part of this. So I would agree with you. Like, Socrates would say that all of the virtues are actually just parts of wisdom, right? Temperance is a wisdom of your own self and your own self control, and courage is a wisdom about what you should or shouldn't be taking action for, and justice is wisdom of how to treat other people. But I think you're right. Temperance seems small, but it's that it's that it's like the Atomic Habits guy, James Clear says, right, where it's like it's 1% every day, but if you do that for 100 days, you're 100% better, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's kind of where it falls out for me and all of that. But anyways, we're gonna have a shorter episode today, but Mick, thank you so much for today. Honestly, this was an interesting topic. I think this is one, just like with all the virtues topics when we cover, it's always going to be great to hear from the community. So we'd love to hear from the community. info@pubandporch.com. Comment on the video, like, subscribe, or, send us a message some way. temperance in the community, I think, is one of those things that people, I would imagine it resonates more with people as when they think about their day to day. So, do you have any closing thoughts for us today, Mick?
So the last thing I would say was something that was brought up to me this week is, and maybe it's another cheat, but to find time to walk every day,
Yeah.
right? It gets you away from the modern world and obviously don't walk around looking at your phone. And as Nietzsche said, some of the best ideas, if not all the best ideas, come during a walk. So
Yeah.
I would just add that to your list of things that you might want to do in addition to cold plunges and CrossFitting and all that, which is all great. It's
Yeah.
just go for a walk, man. That's how the Stoics did it. They didn't
Yeah.
just stay on the porch, by the way, according to the professor I used to hang out with at
Yeah.
the Temperance pub, hence the pub and porch name. He said actually they would meet there and then they would walk. If you go to Athens, there's mountain. It's rung by mountains. They would just
Yeah.
go. I can't remember the name of the mountain, but I used to run there all the time, and they would just
Yeah.
walk around the mountains talking.
Yeah.
So take time to walk. That would be my closing comments.
Yeah. Kinetic meditation, as I sometimes call it. All right. Well, we'll see everybody on the next one. Cheers, Mick.
Sláinte. Thank you for listening to the Pub and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pubandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pubandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pub and Porch out.